Some films arrive like meteors, brilliant, terrifying, and misunderstood. Critics pan them, audiences walk out, and studios bury them in shame. Yet years later, those very same flops roar back as cult monuments, celebrated by die-hard fans who see what no one else did. So why do certain sci-fi misfits go from failures to obsessions? Stick around, because these 15 films prove that sometimes the movies audiences hated first end up rewriting history. Blade Runner, 1982. When Ridley Scott released Blade Runner in 1982, audiences didn't know what to make of it. Here was a futuristic Los Angeles drenched in rain, neon, and smoke, a noir detective story wrapped inside a meditation on what it means to be human. But back then, people thought it was slow, confusing, and worse, boring. Coming just weeks after E.T., audiences wanted wonder and heart. Instead, Scott delivered brooding androids, philosophical monologues, and a pacing that crawled. The studio didn't help matters. They forced in a clumsy voiceover narration and a tacked-on happy ending to make it commercial. Critics ripped it apart. Reviewers called it style over substance, a glossy bore that would fade into obscurity. The box office agreed. Blade Runner barely made its budget back and disappeared like a replicant with an expired lifespan. But the afterlife was sweeter. As VHS and later DVD spread, Blade Runner transformed into a visual Bible for cyberpunk. Directors studied its design, artists copied its look, and fans memorized its cryptic lines. When Scott's director's cut arrived in 1992, stripped of narration, restored to its dreamlike ambiguity, the film finally made sense. Suddenly, this failure was being hailed as one of the greatest sci-fi films ever made. Today, every moody future city owes a debt to Blade Runner. What once felt empty now feels prophetic, and those replicants, they became icons of cinema. Sometimes being ahead of your time means you'll be hated first and worshipped later. The Thing, 1982. Imagine sitting in a theater in 1982. You've just watched E.T., a sweet story about a friendly alien. Then along comes John Carpenter's The Thing. No cuddly extraterrestrial here, just paranoia, frostbite, and the most grotesque transformations ever put on film. Audiences recoiled. Critics trashed it. Roger Ebert called it a great barf bag movie. Others called it repulsive junk. Universal had gambled on Carpenter to deliver a blockbuster. Instead, he gave them a bleak tale of Antarctic researchers torn apart, literally, by a shape-shifting alien parasite. Rob Bottin's special effects were astonishing. Heads sprouting spider legs, chests turning into toothy maws, and creatures exploding in bile and flame. But in 1982, moviegoers weren't ready. They dismissed it as gory nonsense. The box office was a disaster. Carpenter's reputation took a hit so severe he lost jobs for years. For decades, The Thing was remembered as the movie that ruined his career. And yet, slowly, something changed. Horror fans whispered about its craftsmanship. VHS copies circulated, and suddenly those repulsive effects became landmarks of practical artistry. The film's nihilistic tone, once a weakness, became its strength in an age jaded by false hope. Now, The Thing is celebrated as one of the greatest horror sci-fi hybrids ever made. Its influence drips through everything from The X-Files to Stranger Things. The irony? The very same paranoia that audiences hated is what made it timeless. Carpenter didn't just make a movie, he made a survival test in celluloid. Dune, 1984. David Lynch's Dune should have been a masterpiece. A beloved sci-fi novel, a visionary director, a cast stacked with talent. How could it fail? Simple. It was too weird, too dense, and too messy for mainstream audiences in 1984. Lynch delivered a hallucinatory epic about desert planets, spice-fueled empires, and prophecies layered in whispered voiceovers. The film was a swirl of grotesque villains, surreal dream sequences, and incomprehensible political intrigue. For the average moviegoer, it was exhausting. Critics agreed. They called it an incoherent disaster, a fiasco that butchered Frank Herbert's classic. The studio panicked. They hacked Lynch's cut down to a 2-hour tangle, leaving characters underdeveloped and plotlines abandoned. Lynch himself disowned the movie, refusing to even talk about it in interviews. At the box office, it bombed hard, mocked as one of the decade's great sci-fi misfires. But here's the twist. Fans refused to let go. Midnight screenings and bootleg extended cuts spread like wildfire. Its Baroque visuals and grotesque designs earned admiration from the counterculture. By the 1990s, critics began revisiting it, praising its daring scope, even if flawed. Musicians and designers borrowed its imagery. Lynch may have hated it, but cult audiences cherished it. Today, Dune is remembered less as a failure and more as a bold swing that missed, but missed gloriously. And without it, Denis Villeneuve's modern Dune films might never have been greenlit. Sometimes it takes a so-called flop to plant the seeds of a legend. Tron 1982. When Tron hit theaters in 1982, Disney thought it had a surefire winner. Computer graphics were the future. Audiences would marvel at a digital world inside a mainframe, right? Wrong. Early viewers didn't marvel, they yawned. Critics dismissed it as sterile, cold, and emotionally hollow. Jeff Bridges starred as Kevin Flynn, a programmer sucked into a computer system where gladiatorial games decided fate. The visuals were groundbreaking. Glowing suits, light cycles, and vector landscapes unlike anything seen before. But the story? Many thought it was flat, too technical, too geeky for its time. Disney executives were crushed. Tron was supposed to reinvent the studio for a new generation. Instead, it flopped, becoming a punchline about how computers could never replace real effects. For years, the film was shelved as an expensive experiment gone wrong. Yet something happened in the shadows. Gamers adored it. Tech geeks adopted it as a digital prophecy. VHS copies circulated in arcades and computer clubs where Tron became a badge of honor. Those cold graphics that alienated audiences in 1982, they became iconic as technology evolved. By the late 1990s, people realized Disney had accidentally predicted the internet age. Today, Tron is celebrated as visionary. It inspired not just a sequel, but decades of video game aesthetics and digital art. What once felt like a lifeless experiment is now revered as ahead of its time. Sometimes, the future just needs a little time to catch up. Event Horizon, 1997. When Paul W.S. Anderson's Event Horizon premiered in 1997, critics lined up to tear it apart. They called it loud, gory, and utterly ridiculous. Audiences agreed, avoiding it in theaters and condemning it as a mess of half-baked ideas. On release, it seemed destined for the trash heap. But what made Event Horizon so divisive? The film followed a rescue crew sent to investigate a spaceship that had vanished into a black hole and returned wrong. What they found was a vessel haunted by visions of terror, madness, and interdimensional horrors. The design was bold, the atmosphere chilling, but the tone? Far too bleak for mainstream audiences. People didn't want psychological torment mixed with cosmic dread. Adding to the failure, the studio slashed nearly half an hour of footage, leaving the film disjointed. The cut scenes, rumored to be even more disturbing, achieved legendary status among fans who clamored for a director's cut that never came. Still, Event Horizon refused to die. Late-night cable reruns and DVD releases brought it new life. Suddenly, horror buffs started recognizing its strengths: the claustrophobic set design, the unsettling imagery, and the raw performances of Lawrence Fishburne and Sam Neill. Fans began calling it a lost classic, a film that dared to push sci-fi into gothic horror territory. Now, Event Horizon enjoys a second life as a cult essential. It may never have scared up big box office numbers, but it lingers in the imagination like a ghost ship, terrifying, unforgettable, and impossible to ignore. What was once dismissed as garbage now sails proudly in the fleet of misunderstood legends. Dark City, 1998. Released just a year before The Matrix, Alex Proyas's Dark City should have been a genre-defining hit. Instead, it flopped. Critics called it confusing. Audiences ignored it. And within weeks, it was buried under bigger box office titles. But here's the irony. Many of the elements people loved about The Matrix had already appeared in Dark City. The story follows John Murdoch, a man who wakes up with no memory in a city that never sees daylight. As he searches for answers, he discovers sinister beings called the Strangers, pale figures with the power to freeze time and rewrite reality. The visuals were stunning. Art Deco skyscrapers that twisted like puzzles, rain-slicked streets, and a cityscape built to disorient. But mainstream audiences weren't interested in moody noir mixed with philosophy. They wanted action. The studio didn't help. They spoiled the film's mysteries by forcing a clumsy opening narration that explained too much too soon. Without the thrill of discovery, audiences wrote it off as another sci-fi misfire. But cult fans refused to forget it. On DVD, Dark City gained traction. Scholars praised its philosophical questions about memory and identity. Designers studied its visuals. Directors cited it as an influence. Slowly, its reputation transformed. What was once a confusing mess became a masterpiece of atmosphere. Today, Dark City is considered one of the most stylish sci-fi noirs ever made. Its reputation has grown so much that some argue it deserves equal standing with The Matrix. Proof that sometimes the wrong timing can bury a film, at least until true fans dig it back up. Flash Gordon, 1980. When Dino De Laurentiis unleashed Flash Gordon in 1980, critics had a field day tearing it apart. They called it campy nonsense, a gaudy mess of bad dialogue and cheap effects. Audiences, expecting Star Wars-level thrills, left theaters disappointed. On release, Flash Gordon was treated as a joke. But here's the thing. It was meant to be outrageous. With its glittering costumes, bright colors, and deliberately exaggerated performances, Flash Gordon embraced excess. Max von Sydow chewed scenery as Emperor Ming. Sam J. Jones played the square-jawed hero with wide-eyed sincerity. And Queen delivered one of the greatest rock soundtracks ever attached to a movie. At first, all of that felt wrong. The seriousness of Star Wars had shifted expectations. No one wanted camp. They wanted realism. So Flash Gordon bombed, dismissed as an embarrassing throwback. Yet something strange happened over time. Fans realized the very things critics mocked, the over-the-top acting, the wild costumes, the booming Queen soundtrack, were what made the film unforgettable. It became a cult favorite on television reruns and home video. Musicians, artists, and comedians cited it as inspiration. Even Ted gave it a hilarious second life decades later. Now, Flash Gordon isn't remembered as a disaster. It's remembered as a glorious, unapologetic space opera that dared to be silly. Critics may have laughed at it in 1980, but cult fans are still shouting along with Queen's anthem, "Flash! Ah, ah!" Starship Troopers, 1997. Paul Verhoeven's Starship Troopers is a film that critics didn't just dislike, they outright misunderstood. On the surface, it looked like a brainless action flick about beautiful young soldiers blasting giant bugs. Reviewers dismissed it as shallow and dumb, accusing it of glorifying violence and war. Audiences weren't impressed either, and the movie tanked at the box office. But here's the catch. It was never meant to be taken at face value. Verhoeven, who had previously skewered consumerism in RoboCop, aimed Starship Troopers at propaganda itself. From the shiny uniforms to the absurdly cheerful military ads within the movie, the entire thing was a satire. It mocked blind nationalism, militarism, and even the way Hollywood packages war as entertainment. The problem? Most people missed the joke. They saw pretty actors fighting bugs and thought it was schlock. The satire was too sharp for mainstream audiences to catch in 1997. As years passed, though, fans